My mom is sort of a type of woman that I think we've all met. She was so invested in, for want of a better word, patriarchy. You know, she saw her life's mission as taking care of her husband, more even than taking care of her children. She didn't have friends. She didn't. I mean, she used to say to me, "Don't be friends with women; they're terrible friends. They'll be traitors to you." And you know, so that was kind of the house I was raised in. And then I got to college and graduate school, and yeah, the Harry Armpit ladies were kind of exactly what my mother had warned me about. You know, kind of angry and whatever. And then I went to the New York Women's Foundation breakfast, and it was the opposite of all those things. And as I got closer and closer and more engaged with the Women's Foundation, you know, frankly, I think I got involved in it not because it was really good charity, but because I had all of these other mothers. I was, you know, when I went on the board, I was 31, 32, and everybody was in their 50s and 60s, and they mothered me. And I think, you know, I got really devoted to it in part just really for, I needed that personally. I just really needed some mothering. And then I kind of woke up from the great mothering orgy that was about the first 5 years, which was wonderful. And there's some very incredibly connected friendships that I continue to have with women much older than I am. But I kind of woke up and looked around and said, well, this is interesting, because it also just so happens that while I was having a really nice time in what I needed personally, I was doing this work that seems actually to be kind of at the center of everything. And it was before the international community really embraced the idea that women's funding mattered. And that has really been very recently, and it's so weird to have a tailwind for a change. There was just this really interesting thing happening where I could see that if you went into a neighborhood, you know, and you asked yourself, like, what does this neighborhood need? You know, well, it needs this social service agency. Oh, it's here already. It's just underfunded. And look, it's run by women, you know. And everywhere I went, it was like women were already trying to address the problems. They just didn't have the resources. And not only that, but they were like right in the middles of all the relationships, all the important relationships, the block associations and the schools and the churches and, yes, the families, obviously. So it started to be clear that, you know, yes, a rising tide lifts all boats, or I think of it as more of a spider web, you know, and just like kind of right in the middle of the spider web is the mommy spider. You know, she feels so much of what's happening out there. So it seemed like, oh, this is not just a question of fairness. Although it is a question of fairness, and women are underrepresented and are underfunded, do disproportionately represent most of the categories of poverty. But this is also a question of effectiveness. This is a question of, if you want to help poor neighborhoods, why would you not go through women? But I'm like more and more believing that there's also this other thing, this really powerful, important thing. You know, that when we had an off-camera interview with one of the warlords in our film, and I said to him, you know, 15% of us women in this country have been raped. 50% of them. And one of them threatens to strip naked, and now you're going to want to see the movie. And you all go crazy. You all like, what is that? I mean, you guys completely are undone by one woman threatening to strip naked. What is that about? And he looked at me like I was stupid. And he said, they were our mothers. And I said, I'm sorry, you have to tell me more. And he said, well, you'd have to ask yourself, what would force your mother to give her dignity away? And then he said, you know, there wasn't one man in that room in that moment didn't ask himself, what did I do to get us here? Talk about a paradigm shift. Talk about a paradigm shift. And I thought to myself, wow, you know, what if our healthcare debate in Congress occasionally had a moment where we thought, what did I do to get us here? Can you imagine if politics worked that way? You know, I mean, really. And I started to think, you know, okay, so I'm going cosmic, I'm going Yoda now. So, who in most lives, not all lives, obviously not all lives, but in most lives, the first voice is a woman's voice. You know, and it's not just the first voice saying just anything. It's the first voice, first of all, that says, I love you, you're safe, you're going to be all right, I'm here for you, I'm not going anywhere. And then what it starts to say right after all that stuff is, share your toys, don't hit, be a good friend. It's a civilizing voice. It's the first voice of civilization in our lives, in our hearts. And I happen to think think that it's distinctly possible that it's a voice that functions on a frequency that perhaps penetrates all of the things that we wrap around ourselves to make it okay to do all the shitty stuff we do, you know, and we all do shitty stuff. And those guys in that room were some of them basically okay guys who were slouching into the moral quagmire. And that was what happened, was this voice, this frequency, this kind of remembered state penetrated those layers of what prevented them from remembering who they were. And that is very profound. So I happen to believe that there is a transformative power in bringing women to leadership that is more than simply the question of we belong in our 50 or 51%, let's face it, of jobs. Because we are 51% of the population. That's pretty important. I think it's more even than a question that very often they bring their experience as mothers, more often they bring their experience, you know, on the ground to leadership. But I think even more than that is this question of a particular kind of voice which we've locked out of the room again and again and again.
Thank you. Thank you.